If you want to win money in week 10, you need to identify the best plays on the slate. And I'm here to help you with that. Here are the must-have plays for week 10. And I'm beginning with my favorite pay-up option at any position. And yeah, he's the most expensive player, and it's going to be Tyreek Hill, who should be $10,000, but he's not. You see, what you get in Tyreek Hill is the player who is seeing over 11 targets per game this season, over 120 receiving yards, and 23 fantasy points per game. And last week, we finally got red zone work. He came into week 9 with just 1 red zone target on the year. Last week alone, he had 2 and found the red zone touchdown. So continue to play Tyreek, more on the Dolphins later, and if we're going to play an expensive wide receiver, well, we got to find some cheap options. And one of those cheaper options is going to be $5,700 Jerry Jeudy, who has now seen 7 or more targets very quietly in 4 straight games. He's coming out of the bye week, and he's benefiting from playing with Russell Wilson out of the slot. 55% of the time this year, he's playing from the slot. And it's leading to good usage, especially after the catch. This opens up more big play upside for him. He's the number 13 receiver in yards after the catch. And those yards after the catch are going to be beneficial, especially in this matchup, and that's why I like his player prop. I've taken Jerry Jeudy over 49.5 receiving yards this week. I have him in the 60s, and you can do it too with a free bet if you would like, with the link in the description below on prizepicks.com. So we've hit on an expensive receiver, a somewhat cheaper. Let's find a guy in that mid-range. And I'm looking at $6,900 Amon-Ra St. Brown, who hasn't scored over 14 points since week 3, but he's been injured. Last week was his second game back from injury. And now he set a season high in snaps in back-to-back weeks with 93 and 95%. And last week he ran 100% of the routes for the first time this season. So he's finally healthy. It's just now a matter of time. And he saw 9 targets, so it's not like he's not getting open. He has now averaged 10.8 targets over his last 11 healthy games. And he'll be facing the Bears' number 22 secondary this week. Expect a nice week for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that's a lot of wide receivers. Let's talk running back. Starting with some sneakier running back plays. And we can start with David Montgomery, who's not picking up a lot of ownership. I believe he is going to be a leverage play, meaning he is lower owned than he should be. The most important thing in fantasy DFS is leverage. Now, despite the Bears saying they're going to go to the hot hand approach and start using Khalil Herbert more, we're not really seeing that. Because if we look at the snap count of David Montgomery, over these last 5 weeks, he's played 70% or more of the snaps in the games, including the last 2 games, 72% and 70%. He's not losing work to Herbert. And even with Justin Fields being mobile in the red zone, Montgomery has 2 or more red zone touches in 5 straight games. And now he enters a game against the Lions' bottom 10 run defense, ranking 24th this season. So consider Montgomery and this next guy. And that would be $5,500 Najee Harris, who, if you watch our main slate videos, you know I don't think he's that great. But for the context of this 1 week, he's just $5,500. He's priced around a bunch of backup running backs like Deion Jackson and Nyheim Hines. And I'll say it again, he hasn't been great. He's number 64 in running back efficiency, and now there's rumors that Jaylen Warren might start seeing more work, the rookie, after this bye week. But I don't think it's all going to come at once. And he'll face a Saints defense that is continuing to see injuries and play worse against the run, ranking 17th versus the run. And of course, if Najee was picking up ownership, I'd have no interest here. It's mainly the price point and likely around 5% ownership. And now let's talk quarterback, starting with $6,700 Tua Tagovailoa, who I believe is a fantastic play. Basically every single week he's been great and under-owned. This week he'll finally get his credit and pick up some ownership, but not all that much. Tua is perfectly executing this offense. He's number 1 in efficiency, number 5 in accuracy. It's basically just get the ball out quick, get it out accurate to the fast guys who can get yards after the catch, and Tyreek Hill and Waddle, and he's doing that. He's been a top 5 QB in back-to-back weeks, and now is the second highest team total on the slate, coming in at just 7% ownership in the DFS Blueprint on Patreon, a 5-step system to help you win more and stop hitting the deposit button. Check it out. And not to mention, he faces the Browns' number 31 defense, a great play this week. I enjoy Tua double stacks this week with Tyreek and Waddle, and I also enjoy his over 265.5 passing yards. I have him above 280 yards this week. You can take this with a free bet up to $100 with a link in the description on prizepicks.com. You just use the code SAL22 on prizepicks.com, and anything you put in, they'll double up to $100. A free bet. You put in 20, you get 20. You put in 50, you get 50, all the way up to $100 rooskies. And now we can transition to the tight end position with $4,200 Pat Freiermuth. Oh man, I love this guy. He's coming out of the bye week and he's looking good. With Kenny Pickett this year, he averages 12 fantasy points per game and 7.5 targets per game, which is top 5 tight end usage. And over the last month of the season, mainly with Kenny Pickett, he is the number 4 tight end in overall usage. Only Kittle, Andrews, and Kelsey have seen better usage. This is great for the second-year player. And speaking of Kelsey, he's $7,800, $2,500 more than any other tight end, and it is a fair price point because he's scoring 38% more points than any tight end this season. Even at the price point, he's a top 3 tight end this week, averaging 9.6 targets per game and more than 200 air yards than any other tight end. Just massive, massive ceiling here. And let's keep this tight end train rolling. $4,100 David Njoku doesn't practice Wednesday, but he said he's going to play on Sunday, so just keep an eye on this. Now, before injury, Njoku was averaging over 11 fantasy points per game, a borderline top 5 tight end. He was quietly running 30 routes per game, which was fantastic for tight ends, and he quietly ranked 8th in tight end usage. All of that plus increased slot usage is great. If he plays, consider him and this running back. And that would be Dameon Pierce at $6,300. He did pop up on the injury report, so just be sure to track that, but he just had a career day. In week 9, he saw 27 carries for 139 yards, both season highs and career highs for the rookie, and now he's gonna have a fantastic matchup. He faces the Giants' number 26 run defense, one of his best matchups, if not his best matchup of the year. This defense allows the 7th most rushing yards to running backs. Dameon Pierce is top 10 in rushing yards and 4th in broken tackles. Against the Giants tackling team that is just average, it's a good spot. And it's also a nice week for Josh Jacobs at $7,600 to bounce back. But right now, he's the 3rd highest owned player on the slate, surprisingly, according to the DFS blueprint. So I'm not as gung-ho to get him, but the field is smart. Yes, the Colts have been fine against the run, but they're giving up catches to the running back position, and Josh Jacobs has been elite in so many efficiency metrics this year. Yes, Amir Abdullah has been seeing a little bit more passing game work, but Josh Jacobs' work increased last week, and he still ran twice as many routes as Abdullah. He is the clear back here. And now the Raiders are 6-point favorites this week. In his career as a 6-point favorite, he averages 17.2 points per game and over 20 total touches per game. It's a nice spot for Jacobs. I have him projected for around 95 rushing yards this week, but his prop is only at 75.5. This is an official bet for me. I have $50 on this one. I like this one. Out of the ones we talked about so far, the most. Go and get this Jacobs prop with your free bet on prizepicks.com, linked down below. And you should go and play this next wide receiver. And that's going to be Darnell Mooney, who is a wide receiver 1 on his offense. And this is going to be a trend during this video. $5,500 for a wide receiver 1 in a really good matchup. And now more on that matchup in a second, but last week, 17.5 fantasy points on 8 targets. He now has 7.8 targets per game over the last month of the season. He's starting to heat up. And he's benefiting from Justin Fields running. When Justin Fields runs, it keeps the defense honest, and it opens up easier passes for Darnell Mooney. And Mooney is number 6 this year at getting open versus man coverage. So when you're going to have easier passes and you're getting open, yeah, it's a nice recipe for success. And not to mention, he's facing the Lions' 30th ranked secondary this week. Very, very nice. And now next up, let's talk about a guy who's kind of going under the radar because he was just on the bye week. And this would be $7,000 flat CeeDee Lamb, who's going to be facing a struggling Packers defense, and he's coming in lower owned, just around 9 or 10% owned in the DFS blueprint on Patreon, link down below. But he's coming off of a nice week, 18.8 fantasy points on 7 targets right before the bye. And now in his career with Dak Prescott as a starter, he averages 14.7 fantasy points per game. And keep in mind, this also is with plenty of games with a guy like Amari Cooper, who is no longer there. So you should expect Lamb to be around a top 10 wide receiver this week. And this next guy is my favorite quarterback. As of right now, I think Patrick Mahomes is a great play at $7,900. He has the highest team total on the slate, but not just the highest. It's a 30-point team total, which is fantastic, especially in today's NFL where there's not a lot of points, but it's 4 points higher than any other team. Normally it's a point or a point and a half. 4 points higher is significant. And in games when the Chiefs have a 30-point total, Patrick Mahomes averages 27 fantasy points per game. That is GPP winning scores. And you should feel good about him sustaining this type of production because he's throwing over 41 times per game, and he's facing the Jacksonville Jaguars' number 27 secondary this week. All things look fantastic for Mahomes. Don't overthink it. And don't overthink his player prop. It's just that 290.5 passing yards. I have him for 313 passing yards this week. Go take the over with that free bet on prizepicks.com. Now, if you're going to play Mahomes, you want to stack him up, and Travis Kelce is expensive, so we need to find some cheaper guys here as well. One sneakier option who's only coming in around 5% owned right now is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, look, I get it. He has not been great. Just 8 targets over his last 3 games. However, he's continuing to run routes in this offense. 33 routes run per game and playing over 70% of the snaps. Now, if we do look at this, his routes on the season so far, this number right here is the percentage of routes he's running compared to the dropbacks for Patrick Mahomes. So basically how many times he's out there for a passing play. And this number has normally been in the 70s right here. You still see in the 70s. It goes up to the 80s. Fantastic. But lately it's dropped to just 70% and 63%. These are season lows this last 2 weeks, and that's because Kadarius Toney got involved last week and Mecole Hardman is playing a little bit more. And even Mecole Hardman last week ended up seeing his snaps decrease a little bit compared to previous weeks because Kadarius Toney was there. It's basically this big 4 or 5 wide receiver rotation. But MVS is the cheapest option, even cheaper than Kadarius Toney, even though he's running more routes, and he makes your stacks work. And hey, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe for more. Now, a player who's going to be significantly owned, potentially the highest owned player on the slate, pushing towards 20+% ownership, is the most expensive running back, Saquon Barkley. And a big reason for this is, look, the dude's just great. He's his entire offense, but he's facing the Texans' dead last ranked run defense, and boy, oh boy, are they abysmal. And now this week, Saquon's a 6-point favorite. The bigger the favorite you are for a running back, likely the more carries and the more fantasy points, but he's really never been a 6-point favorite in the past. When he's a favorite in general, he averages, though, nearly 17 fantasy points per game. Now he's a touchdown favorite. Expect even more points. And now another running back who's picking up a lot of ownership, and he should, is $7,100 Travis Etienne, who is the perfect run back option in these Chiefs stacks, but he's maybe going to push towards 25% ownership. And now it's hard to blame people because he's scored 26 fantasy points per week the last 2 weeks, and he's the clear running back seeing 20+ touches a game. Now, between Etienne and Saquon, and even Josh Jacobs at higher ownership, I'm definitely taking Etienne here. He's the cheapest, and he has the most versatility, and he's a nice run back option in Chiefs stacks. So there's a stack that we have, but if you didn't want to stack up the Chiefs, another nice option is Justin Fields, Fields, who won a lot of people GPPs last week. He faces the number 30th ranked Lions secondary, and there's a lot of things to like. Beginning with the fact that not only is it a poor secondary in Detroit, but they allow the 4th most rushing yards to the quarterback position. And it shouldn't shock you when I say that Justin Fields right now is averaging 67 rushing yards per game, the 2nd most in the NFL for a quarterback. So consider Fields, and then I must mention that Josh Allen, he has this injury that's going to make him day-to-day. We don't know if he's going to play. If he does, he faces the Vikings 25th ranked secondary. They've given up the 9th most passing yards this year, and he does become a solid play. I would prefer, though, Tua and Patrick Mahomes either way over Allen this week. Now, this is a lot of guys we're discussing here. We need to find some value. Let's talk tight ends. And I'm shocked that this guy is still this cheap. $3,400 for Greg Dulcich, the 11th price tight end on this slate, even though he's been performing like a top 5 tight end. Yes, I did not stutter. He's averaging 12.1 fantasy points through his first 3 NFL career starts. For a rookie tight end, this is as rare as it gets on nearly 6 targets per game. In those 3 games, he's already seen 5 deep targets of 20 plus yards. For a rookie tight end, if you see 5 deep targets the entire year, that's considered good. He's done it in 3 games. So yeah, you should strongly consider Greg Dulcich. He's a starting potential top 5 tight end who's priced nowhere near it. And another tight end priced way too cheap is at $3,800, Dalton Schultz, who has now seen his snaps increase for 3 straight games and seems healthy. Right before the bye week, he quietly had his best fantasy day of the season with over 13 fantasy points. And since Dalton Schultz became the starter in Dallas with Dak Prescott at quarterback over 20 games, he averages 13.8 points, which would be top 3 amongst tight ends this year. Okay, now I want to talk about leverage plays. And as I touched on earlier, leverage does not mean you're just low owned. It means you are lower owned than you should be. It's relative. It means you have a better chance of being in the winning lineup than people are thinking. And the DFS blueprint on Patreon will help you identify these leverage plays and put you in a better position to actually win money, which is maybe something that you're not doing and want to do. We can help you with that. And now to talk about some of these leverage plays, Jalen Waddle at $7,600 is fantastic. He's less than 10% owned, and I do not understand it. I'm confused by this. I thought he was maybe going to be one of the highest owned players. I mean, he's been a top 8 wide receiver in back-to-back week. He's going to be paired up with Tua, who's been having success in past week. It's interesting. So, I mean, I'm just not going to overthink this one. He's 4th in yards after the catch, meaning he has big upside. They're scheming plays for him. He's averaging nearly 8 targets per game. It all looks good. And it all looks good for this next leverage wide receiver. We discussed earlier how Darnell Mooney is a 5K wide receiver, even though he's the number 1 receiver on his team. Well, Cortland Sutton is $5,600 as the number 1 wide receiver on his team. And look, Sutton has had 3 bad games in a row, but one of those games, Russell Wilson got hurt. The next game was Brett Rypien as the starter, and then there was the 3rd game, which is the concerning one. And now in this game, he had just 1 catch on 4 targets for 2 fantasy points. But again, it's just 1 game. Let's not forget, over his first 5 games this year when Russ was healthy, and now Russ coming off the bye is healthy, Sutton was a top 12 wide receiver, meaning he should be priced in the 7K range. So play Sutton and then consider this next running back. And that would be $8,300 Derrick Henry, who sadly broke his streak of 25 plus touches in 5 straight games, but he still put up 26.5 fantasy points, scoring twice and going over 100 yards on just 17 touches. Now he's a 3-point favorite and should still see 20 plus touches this week, but he's priced right next to Saquon, and they're coming in at similar ownership. I have Henry for about 15%, Saquon for around 20%. I'd prefer Saquon there. And now a nice running back at just $5,900. He's basically a starting running back. He's coming in with just 5% ownership is Jamal Williams. And I say this because last week, DeAndre Swift, who has been battling injury, only played 10 snaps. Jamal Williams played over 50%. And now there are some reports that Swift is going to be ramped up this week, but I just really doubt it. They've been saying that for a month now, and he has not cleared 55% of the snaps, seeing his season low last week when active. And very quietly, now you have Jamal Williams ranking top 5 in red zone touches, and he faces the number 30th ranked Bears defense. It's an interesting spot for a lower owned back. And now another quarterback to mention is Matt Stafford, because he got put in the concussion protocol on Wednesday. He has not been good this year, but he's only $5,600 versus the Cardinals' 28th ranked secondary. Earlier in the year when he faced them, he did not have Allen Robinson playing better like he is now, or Van Jefferson. The only reason he's worth mentioning is because of the matchup and because of the price point, but obviously track this concussion news. And now assuming Stafford plays, I like Cooper Kupp at $9,000. The problem is I like Tyreek Hill more, but it's only if you're going to be playing these stacks. Otherwise, go to Tyreek Hill, go to Justin Jefferson, go to DeAndre Hopkins. Now, you know how good Kupp is. He's averaging 11 targets per game, but his matchup might be even better. All of the Cardinals cornerbacks rank outside the top 65 corners in coverage this year. And now let's continue this theme of wide receivers in the 5K range, even though they're their team's number 1 receiver, with $5,300 Brandon Cooks, who look, only 73% of his targets have been catchable this year, meaning 27%, over a quarter of the balls thrown his way are not even catchable. And he's only topped 15 points 1 time since week 1. Davis Mills has not been good. However, he's facing the Giants' number 31 ranked secondary this week. If it was ever to happen, it would be this week. And hey, he's only coming in at 3% ownership in the DFS blueprint on Patreon down below. That is fantastic. I actually really like Brandon Cooks as of right now, and now this next wide receiver is at least a cheap option for you. And that would be Wan'Dale Robinson, coming off the bye at $4,700, kind of operating as the Giants' number 1 wide receiver right now, but there's one major issue. Robinson has not seen a single deep target this year, so when your team is not getting to the red zone often, and when they do, they run the ball, and you're not seeing downfield usage, it's really hard to have a big fantasy day. But the hope is that after the bye week, they get him more involved downfield and even in the red zone. Now, another cheaper leverage play who's even coming in lower owned is going to be Foster Moreau at 3,200, assuming Darren Waller is out. Now, very quietly with Waller out, he's been seeing 5 targets, 9, and 5. I mean, this is fantastic usage for a $3,200 tight end, and he's getting red zone work. Now, these are some of the players you must have if you want to win on Sunday. And if you want to see all of the best leverage plays and who exactly I'm playing and how much of them I'm playing, well, then be sure to tune into the Sunday How to Win a GPP podcast in the DFS Blueprint on Patreon exclusive, link down below.